In today's video we're going to be looking at this, the Pentax ME. Hi there and welcome once again to That Micro Four Thirds guy, Brian James here in sunny Cumbria, and today I'm going to be doing something a little bit different. A couple of weeks ago I did a video on my old Olympus OM1N and I've managed to get my hands on this. This is a Pentax ME, again a 35mm film camera, and we're going to do a quick comparison to what I found on the OM1. This is the first time I've physically used this camera. There's a story behind it which I'm going to be bringing you as we go along. But we're going to take a few shots and just see what we can get out of it. Now the ME it differs from the OM1 that I had insofar as this is a semi-automatic camera. It's an aperture priority camera. It's got a few interesting controls on it. We have a lock. It's on a lock position at the moment. If we switch it to the auto position by pressing the button and turning, we're into a normal aperture priority exposure mode. So in other words, we can set the aperture on the exposure ring here, and it'll set the speed as to what it considers right in the metering system. Now there's also another position next one round, which is 100x. If I take the 100x on the top, what that does is it locks it at 100th of a second. Now that also is the sync speed for the flash. So if you're going to be doing flash photography on this, set to 100x and it's going to be ideally suited to your flash. And the third position on that we can see there is the bulb position. Now today what I'm going to do is I'm going to compare this Pentax ME to this, my Olympus OMD EM1. And I'm going to just do a few shots. Now I've put the 25mm lens onto this. That's given a 50mm equivalent as on 35mm film. And then this one, it's got a 50mm lens on it. As I say, there's a story behind this camera. Technically this camera isn't mine. If this is your camera, I would love to get it back to you. My daughter found this, it had been left, and I think it had been accidentally left. So part of this video is to tell you a little bit about the Pentax ME, and part of it is to actually give you a heads up. So if you know somebody who's lost a Pentax ME in Cumbria, I'm not going to say where because that's part of the thing to identify. I want to make sure it gets back to the right person. If you know the person, get in touch with them after watching this video, please, and get them to get in touch with me with an email. The email address is below. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to compare the two, because there's a 50mm lens on this one. It's an f2 lens, I believe. Yes, it's an f2 lens. I've got the f1.7 Lumix 25mm on the Olympus, and that's going to give us an equivalent near enough. So I set this to no faster than f2. It's going to give us an idea of the two things. First of all, what I'm going to do is I'm going to take a photograph of me doing the film. So I'm going to switch the Olympus on, bring it up, focus it in, and I'm going to set it on f4. Now on f4 on this, I've got quite a blurry background. I've got 500th of a second. So I'd expect on this one, on f4, set the f4 on the meter there. Now I've got no idea what this is going to be like. This is the first time I've tried shooting this film. There's a film already in it, and I'm going to show you some of the pictures at the end to help identify if I can, if they come out. And on this, it's a manual focus of course. And there we go. Inside there's a split screen, so what we're trying to do is line up the verticals that they can focus, and of course your focal point is purely in the centre. There's none of the autofocus on this one, purely manual focus. So we've got a direct comparison between the two. I'm going to take a couple more shots as I go around, both in the Olympus and on the Pentax, so just bear with me a moment. Now at f4 on this film, this is a 200 ASA film. So what we're going to do is we're going to actually change it down to about f8 I think on this one, and take it at f8 on the Olympus. There we go. Now they're both set on 200 ASA, the film's on 200 ASA, the Olympus is on 200 ASA. Again, I'm going to get one of the van, just have a quick little view of the van as we take this photograph. And again on the Pentax. Don't forget when to film on. Now one of the things I find a bit more difficult when I go back to shooting with an older film camera is the fact that everything is manual. Yes, it's a semi-automatic camera insofar as it's exposure, but it's still fully manual focusing. The advantage of that, of course, is it makes you stop and think. It's a slower type of photography. Not silly slow, you can still get some really rapid shooting if you know your camera well. Same as anything, once you get to know your camera really well, it can become very, very quick. But what it does give you the ability to do is to take a few seconds and think about your shot before you take it. The other thing is, of course, as I mentioned in the Olympus OM1 review, you're limited on number of shots. A 36 exposure film is about the most you can get in the cartridge in a 35mm camera. So you could have anything from a 12 to a 36 exposure film cartridge in there. You can't afford to waste them. So each shot should count. Now what I'm doing at the moment, I'm just firing the last of these shots off before we can have a look inside. I haven't actually had a look inside this camera yet. What I do know though is it has an unusual way of loading the film in on the right hand spool. So when I finish this film we'll have a look at that. Let's take a few more shots and see how we get on a bit. Now we talk a lot about equivalence when we're talking about Micro Four Thirds, about it being a 2:1 ratio to full frame. We also talk about full frame as being equivalent to a 35mm film camera. But one of the things I'm finding with this, compared to using the 25mm on the Olympus, I do seem to be getting a much wider view on the Olympus than I am on a 50mm on the 35mm film camera. It gets confusing when you talk about millimeters on lens length and millimeters in film, so of the film camera we'll call it from now on. And that's causing me a little bit of interest. We're going to have to wait until the prints come back to see what the difference is, because obviously from that we can't really see, looking through the viewfinders, an exact representation. Does the viewfinder give a full 100% view of the shooting area? Does it on the Olympus? I don't believe it does on the Olympus necessarily, but we don't know on this at all. Of course, the other thing that we need to bring into bearing is that on the Olympus, on a Micro Four Thirds, we're shooting a 4:3 ratio. This is a 3:2 ratio on the 35mm film camera, so it makes a slightly different angle of view anyway on that. But just a few shots that I've taken have suggested that everything on the Olympus is looking that little bit further away, that little bit smaller in the viewfinder. Let's see what happens when we get the prints back. Now, as I say, this camera was found. It was found by my daughter when she was out walking, and I think this is somebody's prized possession. I haven't looked at photos yet. We're going to look at those as we go through, so I haven't taken the film out at all. I'll put some calls out on social media to see if anybody can recognise it, but if you know of someone who has lost a Pentax EBI in Cumbria in a public place in the last month or so, please get in touch. There's an email address below. I would love to get this reunited with its original owner. There's a couple of things which are unique on this. You'll maybe be able to see, and possibly not be able to see, what make of lens it is. So for me to be able to identify it, I would like to know approximately where it was lost. I would like to know approximately which date it was lost on. I would also like to know what make of lenses on this, because I haven't actually told you. You might be able to pick it up from the front, but I haven't actually told you as yet. And you might recognise the shape of the lens anyway. But there's also a fault on this camera. And if you know what the fault is, you'll easily be able to describe it. But there is a fault which I've discovered, and it is able to be seen from the outside if you know what the fault is. So if you do that, if you do know of that, get in touch with me. I would love to get it back to you. I don't know where in the country you came from, but it was certainly lost in the east side of Cumbria. So, great little camera, thoroughly enjoying using it. Interesting comparison to the Olympus. It's a much newer camera than the Olympus, and when the Olympus first came out it was tiny. It really was considered to be unbelievably small in its class. By the time the ME came out, it's about the same physical size as the Olympus. It really is neat, compact, very easy in the hand. The only problem with these cameras for me is there's no grip. There's no raised grip on them, so you're very much just hanging onto the side of the body. Great little things which Olympus didn't have though. It's got somewhere to put the card for the film speed in. If you put a film in there, you could tear off the top of the box, slot it into the back there, and you had somewhere to actually remember which film was in there, both film type and film speed. And if you took the part with the date off, it would even tell you the date of the film that was in there. useful little thing. The ASA, ISO to you modern people, is around the top, and it's set just by a pull-up ring and turn, but there's also the ability to actually alter your exposure compensation on there. And what it's doing is effectively it's just altering the ISO level that the meter's seeing inside. The meter is typical of its day. Compared to today's standards, it's very, very difficult to see, but in reality then it was a superb meter to see. Stripped down the left hand side with the speeds on, and as I say, you just set the aperture to what you want. You can't change the ISO or the ASA because that's fixed on a film camera by whatever film you put into it, so that's locked. So by changing the ASA around the lens, so by changing the aperture around the lens, it's going to change the speed inside, unless you have it on the 100 position. Batteries go in the bottom. There's a place for there's a little socket for a motor drive, because again, like the Olympus, you could put a motor drive onto this one. And motor drives in those days were literally that. They weren't battery boxes, they were motor drives. That's what you got from it. But you didn't need big batteries in those. Although it's got things like the auto, the semi-automatic mode, it doesn't have things like the through the lens flash metering, which the Olympus has. Even though on the Olympus, I must admit, it's a fairly basic through the lens metering. The good thing about this, it's a Pentax K mount. The Pentax K mount, very, very common lens mount. You can get these lenses, there are thousands of them for sale on places such as eBay. And again, removable lens, click it down, give it a half turn, and it's off. Nice big mirror inside, I don't know if you can see that, really, really nice. And I'm not going to click it over because obviously with it being, having film in, I'll waste a film slide, but put it on the B position, that would lock the mirror up for you as well. To get it back on again, little red mark on the body, line them up. Quarter turn, click, and we're in and locked. The only drawback on this particular lens is that the owner has put a UV filter on the front of it, and like an awful lot of UV filters which go on, it's become very tight in the threads. I can't get it off, and probably couldn't get it off without damaging it. I used to be a great fan of UV filters. Now I tend not to use them so much. I used to use them more than anything else for protection, but I do tend to feel that anything that you're putting in front of the lens is detracting from the quality. You've got another layer of glass, you've got two more flat surfaces, so you've got the chances of refraction and reflection in there. And to be perfectly honest, I've never really damaged a lens when I haven't had a UV filter on. I do tend to use lens hoods an awful lot, and I do tend to find that a lens hood will protect the lens really nicely, so you've got the opportunity there for protection. So I've got away from using UV filters. I'd like to take this off, unfortunately I can't. So the Pentax ME, let's have a look at some of the photos that I've got off the film. But if you manage to recognise anyone on there, please get in touch with them. Tell them to get in touch with me. Pass on the email address, brian@fourcountiesphotography.co.uk. Ask them to get in touch and we'll try and identify it, because as I say, I would love to get this camera back to its original owner. Thanks very much for watching once again. Thanks to all the people who have subscribed. If you would like to subscribe to this, you will find that there's a subscribe button on the bottom right. I've got it right this time, it makes a change. And give me a thumbs up. The thumbs up is probably the most important. If you can give me a like on this, that's absolutely superb, because it gets YouTube to spread the videos a little bit further afield so more people can see them. And if you want notifications every time I upload a video, then just hit the little bell underneath. And finally, you'll find that there's a PayPal link. If you've enjoyed this video and you'd like to help support it, at the moment I'm still not monetized, and I pay for all the cameras apart from this one, which I found obviously, but I pay for all my cameras, all my equipment myself. I'm not sponsored, so if you get the chance and you fancy buying me a coffee, there's a PayPal link. drop us whatever you can. To those people who've already left me a donation on there, thank you very much, really is appreciated. Helps pay for the fuel to come out. Once again, this is Brian James at Micro Four Thirds Guy saying bye bye and leaving you with a Pentax ME. See you next time.